Contrary to popular belief, I have not read every Stephen King story that he has ever written, but I intend to. Let's talk about some that I missed the first time around. Hey, what's up, bookworms, constant watchers, and constant readers? What is going on? I am here today to talk again about the one and only master of horror himself, Stephen King. Yes, I have talked so many times about how I got into King, why I love King, and why you should read Stephen King. What I want to talk about today, though, is there are a handful of books that have actually slipped through the cracks and I didn't read upon release. I talked in my Constant Watcher video that when I was so heartbroken about Dark Tower, I actually took like a little break from Stephen King, and it took 11/22/63 to pull me back in and become that constant reader that I had been for decades before. So I want to talk now about a few books that I kind of missed along the way or just kind of chose not to read when they came out, and they just kind of sat there. Now, there are many reasons for this. Sometimes there are multiple series that I'm reading and I just can't fit some things in. That happens. One thing that will always skip them to the front of the line, as most Stephen King stories usually do, is if there's an adaptation coming out for it. So there are going to be a couple books in here that I am reading solely because there is an adaptation coming. But I want to talk about 5 books in particular that are probably the next on my radar of Stephen King books that I have not read. Now, I started doing a Stephen King reread about 2 years ago, starting at the beginning, and I got up to about Tommyknockers before I said, I'm going to take a break and read some of these fantasy series, and those have kind of dominated my time recently. So yeah, you would think, why don't you just go ahead and move these to the front of your list? Look, there are lots of things that I want to read, and I can't clone myself, so that's why it just hasn't happened. So yes, in most cases, Stephen King stories are always going to go to the top of my TBR pile, but these are a couple that haven't, but they are probably within the next year or two going to get read. And let's start that off by talking about Lisey's story. Now, what has me interested in Lisey's story is not just that Apple TV is doing an adaptation with Julianne Moore attached. It is that Stephen King calls this his favorite book. Of all the ones he's written, he says this is the most personal and most loved story. And that, obviously, is going to get my attention. I feel like he's at a point where he is on the bestseller list before the book's even released, so he doesn't have to make up false hype to get you to buy his book. So I don't feel like he's going to say a line like that without meaning it. All I know about the story is it's about a widow whose husband just passed away, and he was a writer, and she starts going through a lot of his unpublished or unfinished notes and stuff, and discovers some very, very dark supernatural things. If that's been misrepresented to me, I don't know how that actually happened. That's just kind of what I've heard. So missed this one when it came out. Like I said, it was just in the period where I kind of missed some things. But yeah, it's always been on radar, mostly because of the things that he says about it. But I don't know when that adaptation comes out. I believe it's sometime next year on Apple TV. But I will definitely read it before that series begins. The next one is The Wind Through the Keyhole. This is a Dark Tower novel. This kind of takes place between, I believe, Wizard and Glass and Wolves of the Kala, because I believe people call it book 4.5. I'm not really sure. The reason I didn't read this when it came out is because I've talked at great length about it in my Constant Watcher video. You can see here, I talked about that Dark Tower was like my breaking up moment with Stephen King. That if you loved it, that's awesome. I became I did not care for the way books 6 and 7 went at all. Felt like I had been taking this journey for a long, long time, and then I felt like he just pushed out books 6 and 7 just to get it because he was afraid he was going to die. You know, it was after his accident, and I get it. He didn't want to die having his series be unfinished, so I understood why he did it. If you like the way it ended, man, that's super. I'm not taking that away from you. I just didn't care for it. So that's why I've never been able to go back to it. But I would like to read it to see if maybe, for lack of a better word, he unfucked some things that he fucked up. I don't know how else to put that. But I'm not optimistic that that's what this book is about. I think this is just going to explain the Horneveld and things like that a little more in depth. Some things that he kind of glazed over and, again, in my opinion, rushed in the final book. So that's that. This one kind of ties back into the The Dark Tower is why I didn't read it. Didn't read it, missed it when it came around, but when I said I was going to do my reread, I kind of skipped over it, and that is The Talisman. The reason I have not read The Talisman is because after I finished my arduous journey to the Dark Tower and did not like the way it went, I said I wasn't sure if I had it in me to do another fantasy novel. So that's why Eyes of the Dragon and The Talisman have never gotten read by me. I love the fantasy genre. I love Stephen King. I just thought maybe, I love the first four and a half to five Dark Tower novels. And this is apparently a coming of age story too, which I think is his bread and butter. So I don't know why. Dark Tower PTSD kept me away from this book, but apparently they're going to make an adaptation of it too. So I'm going to do it. But I've heard nothing but good stuff about the book, honestly. But a lot of those people like Dark Tower 6 and 7 too. But I know it's a dumb reason not to read a book. That's just kind of why I skipped it when I was doing my reread of reading everything in order. And I don't know. I just couldn't come to it. As far as that adaptation, I'll kind of believe it when it. Sorry guys, it's like 40 degrees, which is freezing in Texas. My hands are cold. I'll believe it when I see it. I feel like they've been talking about making an adaptation of this one for a long, long time, and I wish someday that all of Stephen King's movie rights would get under one umbrella and we could do a shared universe, because I know that ties in very, very big with the Dark Tower and Midworld stuff. So yeah, that's just just so much a mess, and they can't do shared universes unless their name's Marvel. Apparently they have a monopoly on that. The next one is Revival. I have no reason why I skipped this book, because I have heard nothing but great things about it. I've heard this is the scariest book that he has written since the 90s. And that's great. I've heard that from big-time constant readers. Don't know the first thing about it. I think it's like snake charmers in churches, that kind of thing. Whatever. He said, I don't care what the book's about. It's Stephen King. I'm going to read it. But I just, it's a guy on this channel called The Horror Show. His name's Jaime Amfuego. And he's a big-time constant reader. He actually does a show called Hail to the King. Check him out if you haven't. It's excellent. And he actually does, spoiler and non-spoiler reviews for every single Stephen King book. He started a couple years ago doing a reread himself, and he actually went through and read every single story. And it was his non-spoiler review for this that made me say, man, I feel really, really stupid for skipping that the first time. So, that's a big, big influence on why I want to read it. Again, I wish I knew something to tell you about it. Really don't know anything. Just heard it's actually legit scary. And, as longtime King fans know, he's kind of gotten more away from the horror and got more onto the thriller and the drama and sometimes even romance segments of and doing crime novels and stuff now, that you hear one that might actually be scary and you're interested in it. So that's definitely going to happen, I think, within the next calendar year. And the last one, finally, is The Outsider. There is one reason I did not read this when it came out, and that's because everyone on Twitter assumes that since I'm such a big Stephen King fan that I've read the book before they have. And people jumped in my mentions the first couple of days within release with spoilers about this book. And it depressed the hell out of me. Okay, so I won't tell you what that spoiler is now, but let's just say that there's a character from another Stephen King series that pops up in it. And in my opinion, that's a big spoiler. And I don't blame the person, I was counting down the days until the book came out. They probably assumed I'd read it. If they had read it, they assumed I had. And it was one of those I was finishing up a book that I was on, and then I was going to start it. And it's crappy. But HBO is adapting this. It's got Ben Mendelsohn in it. I think it's Jason Bateman's actually the one directing it, and it looks very True Detective-y. So I definitely want to read before the adaptation comes out. I think that's in January that it starts. Again, I don't know anything it's about except that character that shows up again. So very, very cool cover though, ain't it? So that's mostly it right now. There are other books I could do longer videos about Stephen King books that I have not read. Like I said, I haven't read everything. There's a ton of short stories I still haven't read because they're just. I've said before on this channel that I'm just not crazy about short stories. I feel like once they're getting good, they end. So that's why I stay away from those mostly. If it's something that's getting adapted, I'll make a point to read it. Or, if I'm just feeling like I just want some kind of standalone stuff. I mentioned in one of my weekly updates that what I don't like about some of these fantasy books is that they all feel like they've got to be 3 to 15 book series. Sometimes I need just a standalone adventure. I would appreciate that some. And that's why I always go back to Stephen King, because, yeah, there are those threads that connect all of his books. But for the most part, you can read just that book and, not miss anything. And you can enjoy just a standalone adventure or story. I don't know if adventure is the proper word there. So, yeah, I haven't read a lot of those short stories and stuff. So, there's still plenty for me to read. And that's great because I don't plan on stopping reading anytime soon. And, the man's in his 70s now. He's not a young buck anymore. Eventually, he's going to either shuffle off this mortal coil or he's going to fully retire. And as much as I like Joe Hill, it's not Stephen, all right? Let's be real here. So I want to have some stuff to read after the man has left us, So I don't feel like there's a race or anything like that. I'm going to continue doing rereads on some of the stories that I really loved and read when I was 15 because I feel like there are books that you can read when you're 15 and then you read them when you're 40 and it's a completely different experience. Like Pet Sematary, two very different experiences for me. One as a teenager and one as an adult with young children. Very, very different experiences for me. So I want to experience some of those again as an adult and see if I look at things a different way. Like reading it as a teenager and then reading it as an adult, you actually see both sides of that story now, So there are lots of things that are fun in a revisit with Stephen King, but there are some stories that I did not get to that I would love to get to and I plan to get to within next year. So anything that you guys haven't read by King that you kind of want to, let me know in the comments, or if there's stuff that you feel like, if you've read any of these 5 books that you want to talk about, or any Stephen King that you want to talk about, let's talk about in the comments because I love talking to you guys, especially when it is about Cy King himself. So thanks for watching, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.